Good morning and welcome to this week's episode of the Sports Curious podcast, where we are talking about the world's most invasive job interview. We're talking networking, we're talking body checks, all the things. We're talking about the Underwear Olympics, also known as the NFL Combine. And if you've never heard about this, dive in and stick with us. I know that you may not have clicked on this to listen to it if it was just about the NFL Combine, and that's what we titled it, because there's a lot of really interesting things here that we will share with you, as we do love to do in the world of sports, and give you some really fun insights and things to talk about with your friends who are into football, into the world of sports. And here to talk all about that with me is my co-host and my co-founder, Scott. Scott, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me once again. It's an honor to be here with you. And we're here to fill the football void in some of your lives after the Super Bowl. And also we're going to kind of shine a different light on this as the ultimate job interview / networking event. So if you're not into football, stay tuned. We're going to tie it all together as we tend to do with some interesting topics.
Definitely.
Throughout the year.
So give us what the Combine is, the nuts and bolts of what the Combine is, so we're all on the same page.
So the basics is the NFL Combine is all the incoming prospects from college that are looking to be drafted in April. And the draft will be in Green Bay. So it's going to be a historic draft at Lambeau Field. They get all these top prospects in one area in Indianapolis. Everyone comes together, all the teams, all the players, front offices, agents, everyone's in one area. And as you know, Indy, it can be cold. So everyone inside, probably in bars and restaurants talking. And it's just basically a gathering of the minds, the football minds, and everyone comes together and hoping to get drafted and draft good prospects.
So do you have to go through the Combine to be drafted?
You do not. There's about 329-ish players invited to the draft. So you don't have to go. But if you want to be drafted and you're invited, it's usually a good idea to go.
Got it.
And
okay.
There's certainly guys that don't get invited that end up getting drafted. So that's the power of social media these days. Maybe not in the past. You might not know about some of these people, but if you don't go to the draft and you have some cool YouTube video or your highlights from college, they can find you that way. So not necessary, but it's highly encouraged.
Yeah,
Yes.
highly encouraged if you are invited to go to show up. Okay, and they call it the Underwear Olympics because prospects compete in very small, tight-fitting workout gear, and there's the eyeball test where coaches would make notes about their stature, their muscle build, etc. So it's a bit like prize cattle going to market.
This kind of getting poked and prodded, running 40-yard dashes and basically spandex and tight shirts to be aerodynamic. Some of these gentlemen are much bigger in stature than others, and it's fun to see them try to fit in these small clothing items and run. It's quite the scene, especially if you think about it from a job interview perspective. If you were an accountant or an engineer and you had to do accounting taxes in your underwear and people watch you, I think so if you put it in that perspective, I think it's entertaining. It's fun to see these guys, they train so hard their entire lives and perform on the biggest stage.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you were the accountant in your Speedos, that would be a Saturday Night Live skit. It would not be a job interview where this is. Now, granted, you're probably paying these guys a lot more than you would pay your accountant. So there is that. But I guess the big conversation that we have here, obviously speed and all those things are critical depending on your position. And just because you're a big defensive guy or a lineman doesn't mean that speed's not important. But the big conversation tends to be around hand size at this. Talk to me about that.
Yeah, out of all the measurables, obviously everyone wants to talk about quarterbacks. That's the sexy position. That's your franchise can either thrive or go down in the dumps depending on how you rate quarterbacks at the Combine where you draft them. And we have 3-4 years of tape on these guys, but sometimes the biggest conversation coming out of this is hand size. Given the size of the football, you play outdoors, you have to throw the football, grip the football. So hand size always becomes a hot topic. There's been some notable quarterbacks with small hand sizes that I think, Joe Burrow playing in Cincinnati outside. He's from Ohio. He played outside his entire life, but his hand size was concerning coming out. And I think he tweeted he was considering retiring even after winning Heisman in a national championship that his hands were small. So he might as well hang up the cleats for good.
I read in my notes that he had a 9-inch.
Mm-hmm.
So is that from like thumb to pinky?
Yeah.
9 inch. I don't know. I just should have measured mine before we got in here to see how long mine is. But
Are you scared your ratings would be low?
My ratings would be low because of speed, inability to throw a football. Some of those things that are really critical. My hand size is just a minor point on that.
So we'll save you the embarrassment of the hand size. I know mine's not big either, so we might both have to retire.
That's okay. We're doing all right. I can hold a pen.
Yeah, having big hands doesn't necessarily make you a good quarterback either.
Also true.
There's no real metrics physically that make you a good quarterback, as we've seen Tom Brady's famous picture in his weird baggy shorts, shirtless. I think it still goes every NFL draft. It comes around, and I'm sure he tries to get it deleted from the internet, and it will never get deleted.
Well, I mean, it's he should be proud of it, right? He was this tall, skinny little dude in his boxer shorts with his name on the sign that said, like, the poster was a QB Tom Brady. Mm-hmm. He had one of the slower 40-yard dashes on record. I mean, let's just say his performance at the combine was not something that you would expect one of the greatest football players of all time to come from. And so hence why this, obviously, if you show up and you show well, that's great. But like you kind of said, don't count out the guys who maybe aren't as good, but were still invited.
Correct. Yeah. I mean, the NFL draft may be the most inexact science of all time. Just because you're fast and you run a fast 40, or you can bench press 225 50 times, doesn't necessarily make you a good football player. So there's so many factors that go into this, much like a job interview that you may have, just because you're good at one thing doesn't make you necessarily great at another. And how do you bring all these together to perform at your
Yeah, it's interesting. You were talking about how there's some of these factors that really are not determining factors. And one of those that they got rid of in 2022 was the Wonderlic test. It was essentially an evaluation prospect for NFL players. And they asked you questions like, who was the vice president? They might be an SAT type question. All these different things were meant to, assess your cognitive ability. Yes. And then the league got rid of it because they were concerned about their outdated nature and obviously lack of correlation with on-field performance. So much of what you see, and if you haven't listened to our play calling podcast, it's really interesting. But somewhat what you see from a quarterback may not necessarily be, can they figure out what time Tom arrives in Cincinnati if he drives 30 miles an hour versus takes a plane that goes 300 miles an hour but leaves 5 minutes later. Like, that doesn't necessarily always correlate. There's a lot of other factors that correlate to your ability to be a phenomenal athlete.
Yeah, I mean, you would probably want a quarterback with a higher cognitive test in this in the Wonderlic, but it doesn't necessarily matter. I think, was it Ryan Fitzpatrick out of Harvard? I think he probably has the highest. Mm-hmm. And he played in the league forever. He's on Amazon Prime now on Thursday nights, so he's put that to good use. But if your defensive lineman has a poor test, I don't know that necessarily matters.
Right.
It was always supposed to be a secret, but then it would always get leaked. And then that's why they did away with it. And no one ever knew where the leaks were coming from. It was always anonymous.
And I'm sure there's probably, I'm not one interviewing these people at this moment, but they're known for kind of these invasive questions that are attempted to find out your vices and all these other things. So I'm sure they have a plethora of questions they ask these prospects that somehow work themselves around this actual Wonderlic test, but find out cognitive ability on certain things.
Yes, and it's not, like you said, it's not only an on-field interview, it's off-field. So these players are going from team to team. That's the beauty of having everyone in one spot, is these guys are going from interview to interview on days, just back to back to back, and teams are firing off questions about all kinds of stuff, and that's kind of where they get to really evaluate you. And if you're a quarterback, you're probably on the whiteboard and they're throwing plays at you and trying to remember what plays you're running. And if you can go watch John Gruden's Fired Football Academy or whatever it's called, he has a lot of videos where he's going through stuff like this with quarterbacks because he was obviously a coach. And it's on YouTube, and you can watch kind of the process that he goes through, like make them draw plays, where they're going to go, erase the play, do it again. So that will give you kind of a good insight on how intense this can be. Yeah.
Interesting. Okay, you'll have to look that up, and I'll link it in the show notes in case someone's
Fired
interested.
Football Coaches Academy, I think it's called,
Fired
FFCA.
Football Coaches Academy. That's
Yes.
really funny because he's been fired. Got it. I
Yes.
mean, what football coach hasn't been fired, in all fairness?
Exactly. So he's embraced it. But yeah, it's intense. Like they have days of just interviews going from
It's
team to team, and
exhausting.
yeah, it's an exhausting week for a lot of these guys.
Yeah, and you're not likely to interview with all 30 teams.
No.
But even you think about it, even if you had 6 or 7 interviews in a day going for said accounting position, your
Yeah.
brain would be tired. You'd be
Yeah, I
tired
mean,
of talking to people, and you'd want to crawl into a little dark hole and just not talk to anyone.
yeah, they're probably not doing more than one accounting interview a day, or
Or maybe 2,
whatever.
but yeah, exactly. Well, so one of the sexier things we already talked a little bit about, the 40-yard dash. This in the past there have been different rewards for it, like private islands, $1 million for certain times, this and that. We already talked about Tom Brady being remarkably slow. But I love this story. It's in 2025, sports reporter Rich Eisen. So if you would recognize him if you've ever watched a sporting event. He runs it to benefit St. Jude, and he wears his suit with his cleats. He's done it for 20 years. This is his 20th year, right? 2025.
Yes.
His best time was back in 2016 when he finished in 5.94 seconds. Last year, it was 6.25 seconds. I couldn't tell you what I would run a 40-yard dash in because I've never probably done that. But for context, I looked this up.
Yes.
So last year, he finished 6.25 seconds. The slowest person at the NFL Combine last year was an offensive lineman who was 5.64 seconds. So he's still a little bit slower than the slowest person, but the guy who was the slowest, quote unquote, slowest person was 6'5" and 343 pounds.
Yeah. So you put that in
The train.
how big these guys are and how fast they're running, and a normal, average, middle-aged man is not even close to coming to that time. Although he might have beaten Tom Brady at one point.
I'm sure he probably did. Well,
And that's like, and they do like
No.
because it's so long, when people run the 40s, they'll start doing overlays where they have the technology to put people, how they ran their 40 against each other. And it's always fun to see how Rich stacks up against like the fastest guy there and Tom. And the technology is fun to see how, like, just put in perspective.
Yeah. Well, I mean, like, kudos to you running it in his suit, and he's not in his Speedos, but he is in cleats. So there's that. But I mean, I think just what a cool thing that he does, and that's been shifted. It's at the NFL draft now. So it's a little more time to see what his numbers need to be to beat the slowest person. Now, you mentioned, go ahead.
I was going to say, last year we saw the fastest 40 time of all time at 4.1 seconds. So that also puts how fast. So yeah, Xavier Worthy, who ended up getting drafted by the Chiefs, set the record.
Right. Okay, I don't think I realized he was a rookie.
Yeah. Yeah, so he was a rookie, and that's remarkably fast. That's almost nearly impossible.
That's insane. Absolutely insane. So it's in Indianapolis, the draft itself, and the draft is in Green Bay, which will be interesting because April in Green Bay could be kind of chilly.
Yes.
I do have a question. A lot of this behind the scenes and what happens at the combine and what happens at the draft, and we'll cover the draft as we get closer. But a lot of this behind the scenes, we're looking last year, I think, was it Caleb Williams who represented himself in the draft? He refused to give his medical records to all the teams, all 32 teams. He only gave them to the ones that might be able to draft him. But like, I guess, talk to me a little bit about how much of this is performance, how much of this is how I'm showing up and how people are talking about me. Like, it's not all smoke and mirrors. I don't want to say that's, but maybe on the draft side, but like, how much of this is really the jockeying for position? How much of this is saying, you know what, I'd rather be a little bit worse at this, so maybe this team doesn't take me, but then this team takes me, because the worst team in the league is going to take the top pick.
Correct. I mean, there's so much behind the scenes strategy depending on who you are, where you think you're going to get picked, who's picking. We can go back to Caleb Williams last year because he was kind of the anomaly. He knew he was going number one. He didn't want to give his medical records to 31 other teams to let them see maybe he had an injury in the past no one knows about, or he's got some condition. He doesn't want his medical records getting out there. And if a team wants to leak that to the media to try to maybe get someone to not draft him. So there's so much that goes into it. He didn't really do any drills last year either. He knew he kind of disrupted the whole process last year of not really doing anything, but he did show up. He was on field cheering his teammates on the entire time. He was the last person to leave the field. He was like picking up trash. He was thanking all the people for working. So while he didn't do anything football-wise, I think he had a lot to prove with his character. So he showed up and kind of did the extra work that doesn't involve football.
That's cool.
There's so many mind games that go on. There's been people that have intentionally thrown interviews or shown up late so the team wouldn't draft them. There's so much that goes into it.
Isn't that interesting? I mean, it makes sense, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's just interesting to see how this all plays out and how. But I mean, if I remember last year, the draft class, like Caleb Williams was by far the number one pick. There wasn't a question about it.
Not
and
really.
so
No,
the draft class was a little different last year, where I feel like this year's draft class has some big names. Travis Hunter seems to be the name that keeps coming to the top. And for those of you who are familiar at all with football, Colorado, Deion Sanders, this is, Deion's it's sort of adopted son. Travis Hunter played for him, and he's an offensive and defensive player, which obviously makes him really appealing to a team too.
Yeah, last year, like you said, it was top quarterback heavy, like franchise changing quarterbacks. Caleb obviously didn't have the season you expect, but Jaden Daniels, who won number 2, was a Heisman Trophy winner. He got his team to the playoffs when they weren't supposed to. So this year's draft, there's way more up in the air what's going to happen at the top because no one really knows. I think coach said, like, if you're in the top 5, you probably suck and you need a lot of quarterback and a lot of players. So
true.
There's a lot that goes into this year. It'll be way more interesting because last year we pretty much knew what was going to happen. So we'll see, who can ace these interviews. And I mean, if it is Travis Hunter, that would be kind of revolutionary in a way because, like you said, he originally only filed for the combine as a defensive player, but then changed it, I think, a few days ago to be offense and defense. So he's going to go as both. And
keep your options open, I guess. I mean, once you get to the league, you get on a roster, you're going to probably pick one.
Yeah, so this is a case where no one's probably taking their interviews at this point because they want to go as high as possible because no one knows who's going where and what trades can happen. That'll be our draft episode, but teams can trade and trade up and down. So this will be more of a fun combine to see who does what.
And are there, I feel like, we talk about quarterbacks sort of being this key piece, but I feel like just reading through the notes that you sent over and knowing the very minute amount what I do about college football and even the NFL compared to what it seems like defense has really become much more of a conversation versus it just being about the quarterback.
Yeah, and it varies year to year. Last year was very quarterback heavy, and this year not necessarily as quarterback heavy. We have Cam Ward out of Miami and Shedeur Sanders out of Colorado, Deion's son, and those are kind of like the top 2 quarterbacks we're talking about, but they're not necessarily going to go number 1. They could go anywhere in the top 10. So yeah, defense has become, a huge emphasis. A lot of edge rushers, so the guys that come off the edge and sack the quarterback.
Okay, so that's where you want your fast, big guys.
Yes, and cornerbacks covering receivers. So, and then receivers are also huge this year. So it's fun to see how each year the draft kind of has a different theme depending on what athletes and quarterbacks are available.
Interesting. Before we wrap up, what do you want to tell me? What did I miss that we are not talking about? Of course, these coaches should be hanging out with our sister company and these players with our sister company, Cultivated Network of Champions, to learn all about networking because that's what they're doing at St. Elmo's over the ridiculously hot cocktail sauce is networking, making connections, all the things. But was there anything you want to leave us with?
I was going to just touch on the networking thing real quick because, like you said, we'll pitch ourselves here, Cultivate Network of Champions, which will help you network. And maybe a lot of these coaches could use that during the draft because so much off the field happens. You get these coaches together, GMs, agents, they get drinks, they get shrimp cocktails, St. Elmo's, and they make deals. They know who free agency doesn't start till March. So a lot of these guys, although they're not free agents yet, they know they will be. And then teams start to make deals there, although that's tampering. So a lot of behind the scenes stuff happens. Yeah, that's why people can sign their free agents right when free agency starts because of things like this.
They're prepared, basically.
Yes. Maybe somebody has a few too many White Claws and divulges some details that they shouldn't have at the bar. So,
well, as long as I, as the team, don't
yeah.
and the coach don't do that, but if, so and so as the ball boy happens to be in the bar.
Yeah. Yeah. A few teams got in trouble for tampering last year. So, and that certainly probably originated from the draft, talking with free agents and agents and coaches. So,
interesting. Well, it's really interesting to see. It's interesting to understand and keep an eye on just some of the idiosyncrasies in the background. Of course, if you get to watch the combine, please do. It's interesting. You learn something. And if that's, if you're hanging out with people who are big football fans, or if you are a big football fan, you realize you learn things. The actual combine is Thursday. No, that's the draft. I'm sorry. The draft is in April. The combine is just coming up here around the corner, February 27th.
Yeah, and all the on-field stuff's usually like Thursday, Friday, Saturday. Mm-hmm. Like all the medicals and interviews usually go before that. And they've turned it, one more thing, I'm sorry. They've turned it into, like, as the NFL likes to, they turn the draft into a traveling circus city to city. They've remained committed to keeping it in Indianapolis. Fans have shown up. Last year, they set the record. Like 27,000 people showed up just to watch people run in the spandex. So as much as the NFL likes to go around, make money in different cities, they have stayed committed to Indy.
Yeah, we'll see how long that lasts, but
yeah, for now,
warmer weather in February might be appealing at some point. So
yes, absolutely.
Well, thanks for sharing all this with us. And thank you for not showing up in our underwear. Actually, you wouldn't really know if we showed up in our underwear for the Underwear Olympics or not, because you can't see. And so there you have it. And stay tuned. We'll be talking about the draft and all the other things coming up. There's a lot happening in the world of sports over the next couple of months. Thanks, Scott.
Thank you.